I think it's pretty safe to say that Chris Mclean is one of the most absurdly demented figures in children's cartoons. He is a package of vicious sadism, excessive vanity, and negligent irresponsibility. The amount of pain that he has inflicted may seem immeasurable, but that's what I'm going to try and disprove today. Keyword, try. Today I'm going to take a look at a list of his crimes committed throughout all the seasons of Total Drama and hopefully find a decent estimate on how long he would be charged for them, because his rampage of terror is through. Or at least that's what I would say if there wasn't a new season of the show coming out. There are a few rules and clarifications I want to make though. I want to limit this to things Chris Mclean has done that are more or less cut and dry instances of a crime. There are a lot of things he's done over the years that are pretty much inexcusable, but aren't easy to fit into discrete violations of written law. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to just choose the best examples I can really find of any crime I'm charging him of, and I'm only going to charge him with each crime once. Otherwise, we'd spend hours here arguing whether he's committing battery or assault or attempted murder in each instance of the show where he pushes or shoves another character. To balance that out, I'm giving him the maximum sentence for each charge, so expect a lot of life sentences. And just to make things clear, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in this field. I actually did consult a criminal lawyer on some topics I had questions about for this video, but I'm not claiming to be an end-all be-all authority on this topic. This is just a fun estimate I'm making as a thought experiment. Let's keep that in mind, folks. Starting off, we're going with a very easy one. In fact, I think among fans of the show, this is the most obvious instance of Chris Mclean engaging in criminal behavior. In episode 2 of Total Drama World Tour, Chris commands Chef to release a bunch of flesh-eating scarab beetles they had gathered on the cast, and although all the players managed to escape, the intern he was forcing to be a footrest is literally eaten alive to the bone off camera. Wow, this show is dark. Chris didn't even do anything to help the poor guy. This shows a premeditated plan to enact deadly force on a group of people, and one of those people unfortunately passed away in the process. Because of that, I'm going to consider this first-degree murder. You could argue that this could be pleaded down, but the fact that he and Chef willingly collected a deadly force ahead of time that they unleashed on a group of people makes it hard to justify this as manslaughter or second-degree murder. Chef would probably be prosecuted too, because he is the one who took the action on Chris's command. The max sentence for both of them is life imprisonment. There's a lot of instances in the show that can be pointed to as attempted murder. I mean, you're not going to get away with pushing people off cliffs or detonating explosives on boats in the real world. But I think the simplest example is what he did to Ezekiel in Season 3, Episode 13. In that episode, Ezekiel sneaks back onto the plane and gets captured by the cast. When Chris is done with him, he commands Chef to throw him off without a parachute. And given that that's most likely a drop of 8 or more kilometers, yeah, that's pretty deadly. There's even a fade to white to show that time passes, which lends credence to the idea that Chris clearly had time to think about what he was doing and the potential consequences. Because of that, I'm counting this as an attempted murder, and the max sentence for that is a life sentence. He also does this again, like 2 episodes later, to the intern that mixed up Italy and Greece. You might initially think this is about the contestants of Total Drama themselves, but that's not what I'm referring to here. I'm referring to the episode of Pocketo Island, where the campers are forced to traverse a deadly obstacle course with lions, rattlesnakes, and bears, while also carrying babies. How he got the babies is a really concerning question, but in the scenario that he somehow has legal guardianship of these poor children, he still isn't allowed to put them in the care of teenagers in the presence of deadly animals. I mean, it's so bad that he even walked back on it near the end of the episode. For exposing children under the age of 10 to a life-threatening situation, Chris gets a maximum of 5 years. But that's only because I'm counting each crime only one time. If I counted every single baby in this video, he would get 40 years because there were 8 babies. Yikes. There are a couple of notable instances of this. The first one that I think is worth discussing is the Tanzania episode of World Tour. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Chris Mclean probably does not have the legal authority to forcibly capture Ezekiel and keep him in a cage or a box, especially because Ezekiel wasn't even technically part of the show's cast at the time and just snuck on the plane. Therefore, I think Chris deserves a kidnapping charge. Another good example of kidnapping is what Chris did to Alejandro at the end of the same season. After being burnt to a crisp by lava in the finale, Alejandro was forced into a robot suit for some reason. Apparently it was to heal or something, but that doesn't really make any sense. And there didn't seem to be any doctor on the scene that prescribed being caged in a robot suit where you don't seem to be able to eat or drink or expel waste for over a year as treatment for severe burns. Yeah, this show is weird. The details of this whole fiasco are kind of swept under the rug in the show, mostly because it raises a lot of confusions and the whole thing was really just meant to be a Star Wars reference, but you have to realize that Alejandro was kept in the suit against his will for over a year away from his friends and family, and he didn't seem to have any say in that. There's also the weird implication in the All-Stars premiere that he might have been comatose the entire time, but there are a lot of conflicting details about that. All-Stars was never really known for its internal consistency. But yeah, Chris is getting a life sentence for these offenses. I don't know how Chris gets away with installing cameras in bathrooms. In Total Drama Island, the cast is lucky enough to be provided bathrooms that don't have built-in surveillance technology, but the World Tour cast is not so fortunate, as it's implied that the confessional is the only bathroom they have access to in the first episode of the season. He's essentially forcing them to be videotaped while using the bathroom, as there's no other reasonable way to answer nature's calls on the premises without, breaking several implicit social contracts. And yeah, that's nasty, Chris. What the heck is wrong with you? That's not even to mention the time where he intentionally broke the bathroom lock in one of the episodes. The max sentence for voyeurism is 5 years, along with a mandatory inclusion in the Canadian National Sex Offender Registry. Oh great, this is a topic that's fun to talk about. So, even though the age of consent in Canada is 16, the age limit of what is considered cheese pizza in Canada is still 18, meaning that although in most cases the Total Drama cast are seen as adults in the court of law, when it comes to Chris taping them in the bathroom without their consent and presumably using that footage on television and distributing it among the show's producers, yeah, it's dangerously cheesy pizza. For the making and distribution of that pizza, Chris will get 28 years in total, along with being registered as a sex offender. Now, I just want to forget this ever happened, because searching up legal information about what truly classifies as cheese pizza in law made me feel like a sicko, and I'm probably on a couple of watch lists now. So let's just move on. Throughout the show Total Drama, we see Chris keeping tons of animals in captivity. And even in the best case scenario, he's probably breaking laws. Even if he somehow has all the licenses and permits necessary to hold sharks, bears, koalas, and Sasquatches captive, he still admits to abusing them regularly. In the Australia episode of World Tour, he claims to not have fed 2 baby koalas for weeks. How he even got the baby koalas is beyond me. We should probably talk about that next. The fact that he keeps a whole bunch of creatures in small cages and ships them around the world is really sketchy. Like, zoos stopped doing that over half a century ago. He's not taking them anywhere in particular, and most of the time they seem to just be hanging around in the dirty plane's cockpit. So, I'm gonna give him the absurdly generous maximum sentence of a $5,000 fine and 6 months in prison. Yeah, I'm really lowballing this one. Though, in his defense, Chris does treat some of his animals well. For example, his man-eating sharks are allowed to unionize and take breaks throughout their workday. The animals that Chris has held over the years seem impossible to actually own legally, and I think the best example is the baby koalas. Koalas are a very beloved and very protected animal in Australia, and they are entirely illegal to possess unless it's an authorized zoo, a trained caretaker, or maybe a scientist. Chris Mclean is not one of these three, and God only knows how he was able to get 2 baby koalas in his possession to torture. So yeah, according to Australian law, the maximum sentence for wildlife trade offenses is 10 years imprisonment and a fine of $210,000. Chris Mclean seems to be a bit of a pyromaniac. There have been several instances throughout the show where he threatens people with explosives, to the point where it can be considered attempted murder. In reality, the use of explosives, even on one's own property, is heavily restricted, and you aren't allowed to blow stuff up willy-nilly without special certification and reasoning. And if that's not good enough for you, there's a pretty good case to be made that the volcano incident in season 3 is arson as well. I mean, he knew ahead of time that pineapples would cause the volcano to burst, and that action led to a calamity that destroyed the entire island, threatened the lives of dozens, and burned Alejandro alive. So yeah, the max sentence for most forms of arson without explicit deaths is 14 years. Given that Total Drama is a television show, that puts the production of the series in-universe under the regulation of Federal Canadian Labor Code. And, you and I both know that neither Chris Mclean nor the producers are giving these poor laborers proper breaks and lunch periods. I mean, his interns were literally starved at one point. I don't even think you're allowed to make unpaid interns do the level of physically taxing work that Chris makes them do. Never mind how many of them have died. The culpability of who is actually responsible for this might be a bit shaky. Mostly because Chris's position in the whole Total Drama media apparatus has always been nebulous. But I've always kind of personally headcanon that his creative control of the show was vastly expanded in season 4 and beyond. So I'm just gonna fine him and the producers $250,000 each for simplicity. Oh, what's that I hear? Sounds like it's time for the civil court intermission. So I'm gonna go off-road from criminal law a little bit because this wouldn't really be resolved as a criminal case, but I think a significant portion of Chris Mclean's wrongdoings fall under this umbrella, so it's worth acknowledging. I'm not including this in the final criminal sentence, but I know if I don't bring this up, a lot of people in the comments are going to ask about it. There have been a lot of times in the show where interns have been seriously injured or straight up died. I think the most well-known example of this phenomenon is in the season finale of Total Drama Island, where Chris literally tells a new intern that he was being recruited as a tester in the final episode because all the interns were dead. The silent intern tests out the balance beam over man-eating shark-infested waters and sadly loses his balance and falls, and presumably dies being eaten alive by the sharks. This is just one of many incidents where unpaid laborers in the show seem to die. Even more extreme is the scene in Revenge of the Island where Chris sends a bunch of laborers to Boney Island and they all get eaten by monsters. And although I'm sure everyone in the Total Drama universe who's dumb enough to work on the show signed a lot of their rights away to predatory contracts, there is pretty much no circumstance in which the family of these unfortunate interns would not be able to sue the pants off the producers in wrongful death lawsuits for this. Like, even if the contract literally said that legal action couldn't be taken, legal action could probably be taken. And to prove that, I have to kind of condense a complex topic about contractual law into just a couple of paragraphs, so bear with me. The contracts the cast and crew of Total Drama sign are almost certainly what are called contracts of adhesion, which are basically contracts in which one of the parties has basically no bargaining power in the specific minutiae of the agreement. The reason I say this is because there are a lot of individual moments throughout the show where Chris tells characters they have to do something they don't want to because of contractual obligations. And the contracts are very big, meaning I doubt that anyone except for Courtney actually read them. In a court of law, an adhesion contract can be deemed unconscionable, which in a nutshell means that it's declared too unfair or predatory to be strictly enforced in court, which, with a guy like Mclean and producers like the Total Drama producers, I can see it happening. So yeah, although I doubt Chris Mclean could be criminally charged for the death of the balance beam intern, I think his family could easily sue the producers for millions. Like, maybe even tens of millions, I'm not gonna lie. The complete lack of safety procedures in the Total Drama workplace really sets that in. This also applies to the set of construction workers he sent to Boney Island in Revenge of the Island, in pretty much every other instance of an intern dying, which usually happens off screen. Though, I should say, I'm not a legal expert, I'm just a guy talking about a cartoon on the internet, and there's a lot to this topic beyond just my simple rundown. While we're at it, I think it's also worth talking about characters in Total Drama that likely could sue Chris and the producers for personal injury. Once again, there's a level of gray area because they likely signed some predatory-ass contracts that waved a lot of rights away, but, like, no matter what Dakota and her father signed when applying for the show, I think the courts would likely side in favor of the 16-year-old girl who was sent into an extremely dangerous radioactive mine as an unpaid laborer, especially because she endured life-altering physical damage and, based on how her speech patterns change, a measurable drop in her IQ. I can't help but now imagine someone in the court administering an IQ test to Dakota Zoid in order to prove a permanent loss in cognitive function as a result of radiation poisoning. Uh-oh. Sounds like that's it for the civil court intermission for today. Thanks for joining us. There's a lot of examples of things like this happening throughout the show, especially with the amount of havoc caused while traveling the globe and world tour. I mean, does anyone else remember the amount of artwork destroyed at the Louvre? The simplest example that I can think of is when it's shown in episode 6 of World Tour that Chris sent out a gigantic robot dubbed the Total Drama Machine to search for an AWOL Duncan, and we see a clip where the machine terrorizes a neighborhood and completely destroys the roof of a house. I think we can reasonably assume the damages there are over $5,000, and because of that, I'm giving him the maximum sentence for mischief to property of 10 years. Assault and battery aren't really defined as different things in the Canadian Criminal Code, so I'm just gonna lump it all together. And frankly, Chris basically assaults the contestants all the time, and they kind of assault each other. All that you really need for assault in Canada is to intentionally apply force to a person without their consent, which he does plenty of times in and out of the game. The max sentence for assault causing bodily harm is 10 years. In Total Drama World Tour, Chris siphons the budget for the season along with its emergency backup by the 10th episode on personal amenities, like a hot tub for his pimped out airplane lounge. This is absolutely a misallocation of funds, and you can even argue he should be held responsible for the fact that the plane had to run an emergency landing that literally flattened Owen and Izzy. Fraud over $5,000, which I'm sure is what this entails, comes with a maximum sentence of 14 years. Now, I could go on a whole tangent about how Canadian law manages the disposal of nuclear waste, and talk about what Chris and the nuclear waste company he worked with would be deemed responsible for in court. But fortunately, I don't have to, because at the end of Total Drama Revenge of the Island, Chris Mclean gets arrested by the RCMP and goes to jail for a year. So, lucky me. And lucky Chris too, as he's already been tried for this, and that's a generous sentence for how much damage he did to the local wildlife. There are several instances throughout the show where Chris Mclean has hinted at not paying several of the laborers in the show. Despite the fact that he seems to rely on a lot of unpaid interns, which in itself seems a bit sketchy, Chef Hatchet is claimed to have not been paid on time in the second episode of Total Drama Action. Chris tries to avoid the question. Interestingly enough, some of the employees seem to go on strike in the following episode. These kinds of disputes don't usually end up in court with prison time, they usually just end up in fees, but there was one case where an employer in Ontario who didn't pay employees went to prison for 90 days and was forced to pay $900,000 in fines. Also, because Chef is asking Chris directly, I'm led to assume that for whatever reason, Chris is responsible for Chef's paycheck and not the unseen producers, so I'm charging him. So, all in all, Chris Mclean has been a very, very bad man. A very, very bad man. I didn't even really cover most of the things he does to the contestants in the context of challenges, mostly because I wrote this video under the presumption that the dangerous things the contestants have done are done under some form of contractual consent. So really, most of the awful stuff he's done there would likely end up being handled in civil court. But even past that, Chris has a huge list of crimes, and if he were to be charged for all the ones I've outlined here, he would get, drumroll please, 3 life sentences, 86 years and 9 months in prison, $1,155,000 in fines, and he has to enlist in the National Sex Offender Registry.
Not cool, dudes!
Oh, also add 10 years in an Australian prison and 210,000 Australian dollars. Oh, and pretty much everything he's done to the contestants in the show, despite the contracts they signed, absolutely justifies a sum of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. Every single episode is a wrongful death and personal injury lawsuit spectacular. Frankly, I would join Total Drama just so I could get injured and sue the crap out of the show. I'd make a lot more than a paltry $1 million, I can tell you that much. Anyway, thanks for watching. Feel free to suggest additions to the list if there's anything you think I missed. Thank you so much for all the support I've been getting on my channel this year, and a special thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are really awesome. I'll see you guys around.